The hum of the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a harsh backdrop to the steady whir of the drill coming from the adjacent room. The sterile smell of antiseptic and the faint tang of fluoride lingered in the air. I sat in the waiting area of Dr. Brian Selby's dental practice, pretending to read a pamphlet on gum disease while my thoughts churned. Beth, my wife of 10 years, was just beyond the door to the examination room. Somewhere past that partition, the man who had meticulously cleaned her teeth for years had apparently decided to clean out my life as well. A laughable irony, if it wasn't tearing me apart. It had started innocently enough. Dental checkups every 6 months. She always returned from her appointments with a dazzling smile and comments about Dr. Selby's gentle touch. I should have noticed the way her eyes lit up when she spoke of him or how she always wore her best outfits to these appointments. But I dismissed it. She was a mother of 3, a busy woman. Dressing up was rare, and I thought it was just a way to feel good about herself. How wrong I was. The discovery came by accident, as these things often do. A text notification popped up on her phone while she was in the shower, and curiosity got the better of me. It was from him, asking if she was still excited about Thursday. At first, I convinced myself there had to be an innocent explanation. But as the days passed, a gnawing suspicion took root. Thursday came, and instead of heading to work, I followed her to the dentist's office. My heart sank as I watched her disappear inside. Her appointment was supposed to be 30 minutes. She didn't emerge for nearly 2 hours. Today, I decided to confront them. If there was one thing I knew about betrayal, it was that you couldn't let it fester. It had to be dragged into the light, no matter how much it hurt. The receptionist called my name. My pulse quickened as I stood, following her down the hallway. Each step felt like a step closer to the truth I didn't want to know. She opened the door to the room, and there they were, Beth in the chair, Dr. Selby leaning over her with his gloved hands hovering above her lips. "Mr. Johnson," he greeted with the professional cheer of a man caught off guard. His smile faltered when he saw the storm in my eyes. Beth sat up abruptly, her face turning a shade paler. "Mark? What are you doing here?" I ignored her and turned to him. "Dr. Selby, we need to talk. Alone." Beth glanced nervously between us, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her bib. "Mark, this isn't the place." "Beth," I cut her off, my voice calm but firm, "wait in the car." She hesitated, her lips parting as if to argue, but something in my expression must have stopped her. She slid off the chair, grabbing her purse with trembling hands, and hurried out of the room without another word. The door clicked shut behind her. Dr. Selby removed his gloves slowly, deliberately, the faint creak of latex breaking the silence. He placed them on the tray beside his tools and folded his arms, adopting a composed demeanor. "Mr. Johnson," he began, "I'm sure there's a misunderstanding." I crossed my arms, leaning against the counter to feign a confidence I didn't feel. "Oh, there's no misunderstanding, Dr. Selby. You've been texting my wife. Meeting her outside of these appointments. And from what I've seen, it's not to discuss her flossing habits." A flicker of unease crossed his face, but he recovered quickly. "Beth is a patient, yes, but any insinuation beyond that." I cut him off. "Save it. I've read the messages." His composure cracked for a moment, his jaw tightening. "Look, I understand you're upset." "You don't understand anything," I snapped, my voice rising. "You've spent years cultivating trust in this chair, building a professional image, while secretly, what? Grooming her? Making her believe you're something I'm not. What's the endgame here, Brian? Were you planning to ruin her marriage for the sake of your ego?" He exhaled sharply, stepping away from the chair to put space between us. Beth came to me. "Whatever you think is happening," she made the first move. The word struck like a blow, but I held my ground. "And that excuses you? A man of your professional standing? You're supposed to know better." Dr. Selby's voice lowered, a defensive edge creeping in. I didn't force her into anything. You want to know the truth? She said she felt invisible in her own home. She wanted to feel valued, seen. Maybe you should ask yourself why she felt the need to look elsewhere. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. My throat tightened, and for a fleeting moment, doubt seeped in. Had I failed her in some way? Had I been too absorbed in work, in the daily grind, to see her slipping away? But no. That didn't excuse this. You don't get to shift the blame. She's my wife. You had no right. She's her own person, he interrupted. You don't own her. The sheer audacity of his words ignited something in me. I took a step forward, my fists clenched. No, I don't own her. But I trusted her. I trusted her to honor the vows we made. And you, I pointed an accusatory finger at him, you took advantage of that trust. Of her. Dr. Selby's confident facade crumbled further, but before he could respond, a sharp knock interrupted us. The door opened a crack, and the receptionist peeked in, her expression wary. Dr. Selby, everything okay? Fine, he said quickly, his voice strained. Close the door. She obeyed, leaving us alone again. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm raging inside me. This isn't over, I said, my voice like ice. I'm going to make sure everyone knows what kind of man you are. He didn't respond, but the fear in his eyes spoke volumes. Without another word, I turned on my heel and left the room, slamming the door behind me. Outside, Beth sat in the passenger seat of our car, her face buried in her hands. I climbed into the driver's seat, slamming the door. She flinched but didn't look up. Start talking, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Her hands dropped, revealing tear-streaked cheeks. Mark, Don't tell me it's not what it looks like, I interrupted. Because it's exactly what it looks like. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said, her voice trembling. It just did. I stared at her, my anger boiling over. You didn't mean for it to happen. Beth, you planned this. The texts, the meetings outside his office, this wasn't some accidental slip. She sobbed, her hands clutching her lap. I was lonely, Mark. I felt unappreciated. You don't understand how that feels. And you think I feel appreciated now? Betrayed doesn't even begin to cover it. The silence stretched, thick with tension. Finally, I put the car in gear. We'll talk later. Right now, I need space. As I drove away from the dentistry, the questions swirled in my mind. Could our marriage survive this? Did I even want it to? The road stretched ahead, but for the first time in years, I couldn't see where it would lead. The ride home was heavy with silence. Beth sat beside me, her arms crossed tightly, her gaze fixed out the window. I could see her reflection in the glass, her tear-streaked face etched with something that looked uncomfortably close to shame, or was it anger? I wasn't sure anymore. All I knew was the ache in my chest, a raw and gnawing wound that felt like it might never close. When we pulled into the driveway, she finally spoke, her voice soft and halting. Mark, can we please talk about this? I need you to understand. Understand what? I cut her off, my voice sharp enough to make her flinch. Understand why my wife of 10 years thought it was okay to betray me with the guy who polishes her teeth twice a year. She winced, her hands twisting together in her lap. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like, Beth? I snapped, turning to face her. Help me understand. Did he make you feel special? Did he say all the things you've been waiting for me to say? Was it worth destroying our family over? She bit her lip, tears welling in her eyes again. It wasn't about destroying anything. It was. I don't know, Mark. I just felt invisible. Like I was nothing more than a wife and a mother. Brian, he made me feel alive again. Her words hit like a gut punch. I'd heard variations of this line before, in movies and books, but hearing it from her, my wife, felt like someone had driven a spike through my chest. I made you feel invisible? I asked, my voice low and strained. Beth, I've been here. Every single day. For you, for the kids, for this family. I've worked long hours to provide for us. I've shown you love in every way I know how. How could you possibly feel invisible? She opened her mouth to respond but then shook her head, as if the answer was too complex, or too shameful, to articulate. Mark, I never wanted this to happen, she whispered. I didn't mean for it to go this far. But it did, I said coldly, my knuckles white as I gripped the steering wheel. You let it go this far. The truth hung in the air between us, undeniable and unforgiving. Finally, I exhaled sharply and pushed the car door open. Get out, I said, my tone clipped. Mark. Get out, Beth. Go inside. I need to think. She hesitated, but when she saw the look in my eyes, she obeyed. She climbed out of the car and walked slowly to the front door, her shoulders slumped. She paused on the threshold, looking back at me as if hoping I'd call her back, but I didn't move. When the door closed behind her, I let out a shaky breath and leaned my forehead against the steering wheel. My mind churned with memories, the laughter we'd shared, the plans we'd made, the life we'd built together. All of it felt like a lie now, a facade shattered by the weight of her betrayal. I didn't know how long I sat there, replaying the events of the day in my mind. Minutes, maybe hours. Eventually, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the driveway. I knew I couldn't stay in the car forever. But the thought of going inside, of facing her again, was unbearable. So, I made a decision. I turned the key in the ignition, the engine roaring to life, and backed out of the driveway. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't be here. Not tonight. I drove aimlessly through the quiet streets, the dim glow of streetlights flickering across the dashboard. Every turn felt like I was trying to escape the weight in my chest, but no matter how far I went, it was still there. Betrayal, anger, and hurt churned in my gut, fighting for dominance. I ended up at a small diner on the edge of town. The kind of place we used to go to when we were young and broke but happy. Before life got complicated, before 3 kids and a mortgage, before secrets and lies. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside. A waitress greeted me with a tired smile and directed me to a booth near the back. I slid into the seat, ordered a coffee, and stared blankly at the menu. My mind wasn't on food, it was on Beth. Was she sitting at home now, replaying everything I said? Or was she crafting more excuses, trying to figure out a way to spin this so it didn't seem as devastating as it was? I'd heard her justifications earlier. It wasn't about you, Mark. As if that made it hurt any less. The waitress returned with my coffee. You look like you've had a rough day, she said, setting the steaming cup in front of me. You could say that, I muttered, managing a faint, humorless smile. Well, coffee helps with a lot of things, she replied kindly before leaving me to my thoughts. I sipped the coffee, letting its warmth distract me momentarily. But as the minutes ticked by, my thoughts kept circling back to the same question, what now? My phone buzzed on the table, the screen lighting up with Beth's name. For a moment, I stared at it, debating whether to answer. Then I hit decline and let it go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to hear her voice, not yet. The phone buzzed again, a voicemail notification. Against my better judgment, I played it. Mark, her voice cracked, heavy with tears. I don't know what to say to make this right. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted any of this to happen. I don't know. I needed something, and I didn't know how to tell you. Please come home. Let's talk. We can fix this. I love you. I love our family. I love us. Please, just come home. I stared at the phone long after the message ended, her words echoing in my mind. Was that true? Did she really still love us, love me? Or was this just guilt speaking, a desperate attempt to hold on to what she had already broken? The waitress returned to refill my coffee, breaking me from my thoughts. Anything else for you? I shook my head. Just the coffee. She left me again, and I returned to staring out the window, my thoughts spiraling. Could I forgive her? Could I look past what she'd done and try to rebuild what we had? Or was this the end? As I sat there, the enormity of the decision weighed on me. Every choice led to a different future, one where I stayed and tried to salvage our life together, or one where I walked away and started over. Neither path felt easy. Neither path felt right. The door jingled again, and a couple walked in, laughing and holding hands. They looked young, in love, untouched by the realities of betrayal and heartbreak. I felt a pang of envy, a longing for the simplicity of those early days. I drained the rest of my coffee and stood, leaving a few bills on the table. Outside, the night air was cool against my skin, the sky dotted with stars. I took a deep breath, trying to clear my head. The house was waiting. Beth was waiting. But as I climbed into my car, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't ready to go back. The car hummed softly beneath me as I idled in the parking lot, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I wasn't ready to go back to that house, not to Beth, not to the suffocating weight of everything we hadn't said yet. My thoughts twisted and tangled, looping back to the same questions. Why did she do it? How did we end up here? Could I ever trust her again? Instead of heading home, I found myself driving toward the coast. The road was quiet, the moonlight reflecting off the asphalt like a silver ribbon guiding me forward. I didn't have a destination in mind, just the need to put as much distance between me and the chaos as I could. Eventually, I pulled into a small parking lot by the beach. The rhythmic sound of waves crashing against the shore filled the air, offering a strange sense of calm. I stepped out of the car and made my way toward the water, the sand cool beneath my shoes. For a long while, I just stood there, staring at the ocean. Its vastness made my problems feel simultaneously monumental and insignificant. The betrayal, the anger, the doubt, it all seemed so small compared to the endless horizon. I sank down onto the sand, leaning back on my elbows. Memories of our early days together flooded my mind. I remembered the first time I saw Beth, her laughter carrying across the room like music. I remembered the way she used to look at me, like I was her whole world. Somewhere along the way, that look had faded, replaced by something quieter, more resigned. Had I done that to her? Or had she let it happen? The questions felt unanswerable, the blame too tangled to unravel. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me from my thoughts. I pulled it out and saw Beth's name on the screen again. I almost ignored it, but something made me swipe to answer. Mark? Her voice was tentative, trembling. What is it, Beth? I asked, my tone flat. I was worried about you. You've been gone for hours. I thought maybe you weren't coming back. I haven't decided yet, I admitted, the words heavy on my tongue. She was silent for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice cracked. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to fix this. Maybe you can't, I said simply. Maybe some things are beyond fixing. Her soft sob reached my ear, and for a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. But then I reminded myself of the texts, the lies, the man she had chosen to confide in instead of me. I never stopped loving you, Mark, she said through her tears. I was stupid. Selfish. But I never stopped loving you. Love isn't enough, Beth, I replied. Not anymore. Trust matters. Respect matters. And you broke both. Her sobs grew louder, and I closed my eyes, letting the sound of the ocean drown her out. I didn't have the answers she was looking for. Hell, I didn't even have answers for myself. I need time, I said finally. I need to figure out if there's anything left to salvage. I'll wait, she whispered. As long as it takes. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. The waves continued to crash, steady and relentless, as if mocking the chaos inside me. The sound of the waves was steady, a relentless backdrop to my whirling thoughts. Beth's words echoed in my mind, I'll wait. As long as it takes. But would she really? Or was that just something people said when they were desperate, hoping to soothe the immediate wound without realizing how deep it ran? I stayed at the beach for a long time, watching the horizon turn from black to the faintest shade of gray as dawn began to creep in. The air grew cooler, the salty tang sharper as the tide inched closer. Eventually, I rose, brushing the sand off my clothes, and headed back to the car. I drove aimlessly for a while, passing through quiet neighborhoods just waking up to another day. The world felt indifferent to my pain, and in some twisted way, I found that comforting. If the world didn't care, maybe I didn't have to either. Eventually, I found myself outside a small cafe. The sign in the window declared it was open, and the smell of fresh coffee wafted through the air as I stepped inside. It was quiet, just a handful of early risers scattered at the tables. I ordered a coffee and a bagel, though I wasn't hungry, and took a seat near the window. The warmth of the coffee felt grounding, a small anchor in the storm. I sipped it slowly, staring out at the street. My mind kept circling back to the kids. Natalie, with her endless questions about the world. Emma, who could light up a room with her giggle. And little Mark Jr., who still thought I was some kind of superhero. How was I supposed to explain this to them? The thought of losing them, or even seeing them less, sent a wave of panic through me. They didn't deserve this. None of us did. I took another sip of coffee, trying to steady my nerves. Beth's actions had set all of this in motion, but I wasn't blameless either. Somewhere along the line, I'd stopped noticing the cracks in our foundation. I'd convinced myself that as long as the walls were standing, the house was fine. But Beth had seen the cracks. And instead of patching them with me, she'd invited someone else to help her tear the whole thing down. The bell above the door jingled, and I looked up instinctively. A man walked in, carrying a briefcase and wearing a look of weary determination. Something about him reminded me of the attorney my coworker had mentioned, a no-nonsense divorce lawyer who didn't lose cases. The thought lingered as I finished my coffee. Maybe that was my next step. If Beth had destroyed our trust, I needed to protect what mattered most, the kids. And if there was any chance I could shield them from the fallout of her betrayal, I had to take it. I left a tip on the table and stepped outside, the crisp morning air biting at my skin. Pulling out my phone, I searched for the lawyer's name and dialed the number. The call rang twice before a brisk voice answered. Carter Law Offices. Hi, I began, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. I need to speak to someone about filing for divorce. The woman on the other end of the line had a clipped efficiency to her tone, the kind of voice that brooked no nonsense. Of course. Let me check availability for a consultation. May I have your name and a brief description of your situation? Mark Johnson, I said, swallowing hard. It's about infidelity. My wife. There was a pause, just long enough to be noticeable, before she responded. I see. Our lead attorney, Mr. Carter, specializes in cases like yours. He's available tomorrow at 2 p.m. Would that work for you? Yeah, I said, though the idea of discussing the collapse of my marriage with a stranger filled me with unease. That works. Great. I'll send you an email with the details. Please bring any relevant documentation, including financial records and any evidence of the infidelity. Evidence. The word sent a shiver down my spine. I had Beth's texts, the voicemails, and the undeniable truth of what had happened, but compiling all of it into evidence felt surreal. Like I was preparing for a battle I hadn't signed up for. After ending the call, I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, staring at the phone in my hand. I'd taken the first step, a step that felt irreversible. Was this what I wanted? Or was I letting anger and hurt drive me down a path I couldn't retreat from? The faint vibration of my phone startled me. Another message from Beth. I hesitated before opening it, my stomach twisting. Mark, I know I've hurt you, and I don't know how to fix it. But please don't make any decisions you can't take back. Let's talk. For the kids' sake, if nothing else. The kids. That was the anchor, the thing that kept pulling me back into the storm no matter how much I wanted to sail away. I couldn't ignore them. They deserved stability, love, and answers I wasn't sure I could provide. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and walked to the car. As I sat behind the wheel, I stared at the empty passenger seat, imagining Beth sitting there, trying to explain herself. The thought made my chest tighten. Talking to her felt impossible right now, but ignoring her forever wasn't an option either. Finally, I started the engine and headed toward my mom's house. The kids were still there, blissfully unaware of the cracks forming in their world. I needed to see them, to remind myself why I was doing this. Whatever came next, they were my priority. My mom opened the door with a warm smile that quickly faded when she saw my expression. Mark, she said softly, pulling me into a hug. How are you holding up? I'm managing, I said, though the words felt hollow. She led me into the living room, where the kids were sprawled on the floor with puzzles and coloring books. Natalie looked up first, her face lighting up. Dad! The other two followed suit, running to me with outstretched arms. I knelt down, gathering them into a tight hug. For a moment, the weight on my shoulders lifted, replaced by the simple joy of holding my children. How long are we staying at Grandma's? Emma asked, her voice curious. Just a little while longer, I said, keeping my tone light. Your mom and I are figuring some things out. They seemed satisfied with that, returning to their activities. My mom offered me a cup of coffee, and we sat in the kitchen while the kids played. She called, my mom said gently, her voice careful. Beth. She sounded desperate. I bet she did, I muttered, staring into my coffee. She asked about the kids, my mom continued. Wanted to know if she should come pick them up. And what did you tell her? That they were fine here, she said firmly. That it was best for everyone if things stayed as they are for now. I nodded, grateful for her support. I've got a consultation with a lawyer tomorrow, I said, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. My mom's hand reached across the table, squeezing mine. I know this isn't what you wanted, Mark. But you're doing what you need to do. The kids' laughter echoed from the other room, a bittersweet reminder of what was at stake. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear, I'd fight for them with everything I had. The next day came too quickly, and the knot in my stomach grew tighter as the clock inched toward 2. Sitting in the waiting area of Carter Law offices, I felt like an imposter in my own life. The reality of what I was about to do loomed over me, taking the first steps to formally end my marriage. Mr. Johnson. A crisp voice called my name, pulling me from my thoughts. I stood, smoothing the front of my shirt, and followed the assistant into a polished office where a man with sharp eyes and a commanding presence waited. Mark Johnson, he said, offering a firm handshake. I'm Thomas Carter. Please, have a seat. I sat, the leather chair creaking under me. He folded his hands on the desk, his expression professional but not unkind. So, what brings you here today? The words caught in my throat for a moment. Finally, I forced them out. My wife cheated on me. I have proof, texts, voicemails. I want to file for divorce. Carter nodded, unflinching. Infidelity is grounds for divorce in Mississippi. It can work in your favor when it comes to custody and assets. Do you have children? Yes, I said, my voice softening. 3. Natalie is 9, Emma is 8, and Mark Jr. is 4. His expression grew more serious. They'll be the priority in this case, as I'm sure they are for you. The courts favor stability for the children, so we'll need to present evidence that you can provide the best environment for them. I nodded, the weight of his words settling heavily. What about Beth? She's always been a good mother, until now. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, Carter said. For now, the infidelity gives us a strong position. You mentioned proof. I pulled out my phone and opened the folder where I'd saved the messages and voicemails. Carter listened to one of Beth's recordings, his brow furrowing. When it ended, he nodded grimly. This will help. The consultation continued, Carter outlining the steps we'd need to take. By the time I left, I felt both a sense of direction and an overwhelming sadness. The path ahead was clear, but it wasn't one I'd ever imagined walking. Back at the motel that evening, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the ceiling. My phone buzzed again, Beth. I debated ignoring it, but some part of me knew I couldn't avoid her forever. I answered. Mark, she said, her voice fragile, I need to see you. We need to talk. I hesitated. About what? Everything, she whispered. The kids, us, what's next? Please. After a long pause, I sighed. Tomorrow. Meet me at the park by the house. Noon. Thank you, she said softly. I'll be there. The park was quiet the next day, the swings creaking gently in the breeze. Beth was already waiting on a bench, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked up as I approached, her eyes red-rimmed. Mark, she began, standing as I reached her. Sit, I said, my tone firm. She obeyed, and I took a seat beside her, keeping a careful distance. Beth, I've started the process for a divorce, I said without preamble. Her face crumpled, but I held up a hand. Let me finish. I don't trust you anymore, I continued. What you did broke something between us, something I don't think we can ever repair. But for the sake of the kids, I want us to handle this with as little damage to them as possible. She sobbed softly, covering her face with her hands. Mark, I'm sorry. I know I messed up, but I love you. I love our family. Can't we find a way back? I shook my head, my chest aching with the weight of my next words. I don't see a way back, Beth. Not after this. She cried harder, and I sat there, staring at the playground where our kids had laughed and played so many times. The memories felt like ghosts, haunting a future that no longer existed. As I walked away from the park that day, I felt a strange mix of emotions, grief, relief, anger, and something else I couldn't quite name. The road ahead would be hard, but I knew one thing, my kids deserved a father who would fight for them, who would give them a stable, loving home. Beth had made her choices. Now, it was my turn to make mine. The end.